Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, happy Friday. Happy Friday, Queensland. We will do the COVID report first, and then we'll do weather, and then we'll do other issues. So in good news, we have 0 community cases. We have 6 cases in quarantine after interstate travel. 4 are in hotel quarantine and 2 are in home quarantine. So our quarantine system is working very well. We have done 10,041 tests yesterday, and I'll just give some testing numbers for the Gold Coast, because we really do need to see, because we had that community case on the Gold Coast the other day, and it's encouraging that we haven't had any more yet, but we still need people on the Gold Coast to A, get vaccinated, and B, if you have any symptoms, to please go and get tested. So yesterday 2,154 people got tested on the Gold Coast, and the day before that there was 1,563. So please, any symptoms, go and get tested. 11,545 vaccines were done by Queensland Health, so people are still coming out and getting vaccinated. Well done, Queensland. We're now at 86.84% have had at least one dose, and 77.21% are fully vaccinated. So great results there, Queenslanders are getting vaccinated. So I'll hand over to Dr. Aiken and then the Health Minister, and then we'll move on to weather.
Thank you, Premier. As you've heard, no locally acquired cases in Queensland, which is great news. There are 6 cases, and they're a mix of hotel and home quarantine, but they're all people that are in quarantine and not infectious in the Queensland community. The Gold Coast, the genomics is available for the recent case there, and that is no link to the other 2 recent cases at Gold Coast. So the most likely cause is there's been an incursion somewhere from New South Wales. The genomics does link to previous cases in New South Wales, not to those 2 recent cases. There hasn't been any interstate travel from the recent case, so we don't know how he's got COVID at this stage. What it does mean is that we need everyone at Gold Coast to come forward and get tested, more importantly get vaccinated. There has been an increase in testing at Gold Coast, which is great, but we would ask more people, particularly anyone with symptoms, to come forward and get tested so we can make sure there's no one else at Gold Coast that's been exposed and may have COVID down there. The other parts of note is that the vaccination rates continue to go up. It's a 0.41% increase in the second dose, which is really, really good. And we're getting closer and closer to 80% double, 90% single. And it's so important we do get there. And just ask everyone in Queensland to, if you haven't been vaccinated, please come forward and get vaccinated. Now's the time. Thank you.
So now that we're aware that this Gold Coast case isn't linked to the most recent cases on the Gold Coast, that means someone has been on the Gold Coast and may still be on the Gold Coast or elsewhere in Queensland who is positive and haven't been identified as yet. So this reinforces the importance of everyone coming forward if they've got any symptoms, no matter how mild, and get tested, and importantly getting those vaccination rates up. Of course we're aiming for that target of 80%, but we want to get further than that, and we want to get to that 90% and beyond as well, and we're certainly on track to do that. So please, everyone, keep coming out and getting vaccinated. It is so important, and we know that it gives us a much greater level of protection. We've seen in Victoria, sadly today, over 1,100 cases and 11 deaths. So it reminds us once again how deadly this virus is. It doesn't matter what variant, we know that it is deadly, and we need to be getting vaccinated, and we need people to come out and get tested. So particularly if you're from the Gold Coast, please come forward, get tested if you have any symptoms, and we really want to see our vaccination rates on the Gold Coast much, much higher. We'd be very happy if they outdo the state average, because we know, being so close to the border, that they're at closest risk for that virus to come into our community. In relation to South Australia, we're not making any changes at this point, but we are watching it very, very closely, and we will await additional information throughout today on South Australia. So please, everyone should be mindful of that if they are thinking of travelling down there already, or if they are down there wanting to come home. they should be watching what is occurring in South Australia very closely. Thank you.
Any further questions on health at all, on COVID?
Do we have an expected date for the 80%? Is it still around the 10th of December?
Look, no, it just depends on the vaccination rate. So we'll probably have a better idea early next week. We'll see how the vaccination rates go on the weekend. So we'll keep everyone advised. But there's no plans to change our roadmap.
Premier, any further liaising with the federal government on Omicron at all?
We haven't had any updates. The Prime Minister said that he would update us, but of course there's National Cabinet next Friday, so I anticipate there'll be a virtual meeting. I understand that we'll be definitely getting an update then. So
Look, by next Friday we could be very close to that 80%. Will you wait, if say we hit 80% per se on the Thursday, will you wait for National
I'm not going to
Cabinet?
deal with hypotheticals. I'll be in a much better position to give you further information on Monday after we see how the vaccination rates go on the weekend.
It's really interesting to see what's happening in South Australia because they're kind of just a little bit ahead of us in
Yes.
opening up.
Yes.
We've got some New South Wales people in, we've got the former
Yep.
Premier there.
Yeah, but we all know when you open the borders, the virus is going to come in. That's reality, and we're going to have to be changing the way we think about this virus because the virus is going to be, right throughout the world, and we have to live with it. So, that's why the best thing that we can do as we prepare for the borders to open, so families can be reunited for Christmas, is to go and get vaccinated. It's absolutely critical.
And vaccine hesitancy seems like it's dropping. Are you happy with that? Do you think that people are finally kind of turning the corner on that and that is just a loud but very small minority?
I think that the numbers speak for itself. Like we've got 86.84% have had at least one dose. I updated the Parliament yesterday. We've got suburbs which are, over 90% double dose. So it can happen. Our aim is to get as many people across the state vaccinated, and we want to, everyone has had the opportunity to get vaccinated before the borders open. Okay, all right. Thank you to the health people. We might go now on to our weather situation. So, look, we've just had a very comprehensive briefing, and I'll get the commissioners to go into a bit more detail. But as we know, there has been a lot of rain, and the catchment, some of our catchments are saturated, but we do have some concerns at the moment, and we're monitoring very closely Gundawindi. Now, we expect that to hit a major peak within the next 24 hours. At the moment, it's sitting at 10.6. Our trigger is about 10.6 to move the most vulnerable from that community. And when I'm talking about vulnerable, I'm talking about people in aged care and in hospitals and blue care. So the plans are all in place. I'm very comfortable that the Local Disaster Management Committee is working well. I'm very comfortable that our agencies have preparations in place, and we'll be monitoring that very closely. We'll be getting another update from the Bureau about the flood levels later on this afternoon. Now, the people of Gundawindi understand, and they've been through floods before, such as 2011. There are some higher grounds that people know where to evacuate to, and we are watching it very carefully, and we are keeping the community and everyone updated. But as you can imagine, it's just been so much rain recently. So in other news too, the assessments have been done on Inglewood. There have been 315 homes assessed, 205 have no damage, 3 are severe, 16 have moderate damage, and 91 have minor damage. So we are expecting more wet weather over this summer period. And if I can once again say to Queenslanders, if it's flooded, forget it. So we'll be keeping the residents of Gundawindi updated over the course of the day, but all preparations are in place, including ADF and any other emergency personnel that are needed. There are swiftwater teams and SES deployed out there as well, and I'm confident that the town is very well prepared. But I might hand over to the two commissioners. I might get Commissioner Leach to go. David? Yeah, you're right. Thanks. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So as mentioned, we have major flooding continuing across many catchments across the southern, southeastern and central interior of Queensland at the moment. Also, a range of minor to moderate flood warnings are also in existence. At the moment, a lot of the rain is cleared, but as the Premier mentioned, we are going to see the potential for the return of severe thunderstorms with heavy rain, locally damaging winds and large hail to many of these areas over the course of the weekend, but more likely into next week. Drilling down to the details, some of the flood warnings, we have a major flood warning that continues for the McIntyre and the Jumeric rivers. And as mentioned, the Boggabilla is going to reach a major flood peak during the course of tonight, where it's expected to reach 12.8 metres overnight tonight. Goondiwindi is likely to also reach a peak of around 10.7 metres, which is also going to occur over the course of tonight as well. Both of these peaks are equivalent to what these locations experienced back in January 2011. Elsewhere, we've got major flood warnings that are current for the Dawson, the Warrego, the Condamine and the Balonne rivers. And also, thinking longer term, we're also going to have major flood warnings in force for the Barwon River, with Mungindi expected to experience some of these major flood peaks in a couple of weeks' time. So, timely reminder that severe weather season is now here and that flooding is going to be a part of our season from now right through until the end of the wet season. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Bureau? No? Carol?
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. Just going on from what the Premier had to say, the local disaster management group and the district disaster management group are in earnest planning for what we believe are some areas that will need to be evacuated later today. Those are the hospital and the aged care centre. There's 12 people in hospital and 69 in aged care. That is the vulnerable people in that community. And we are going to have, obviously, apply an abundance of caution, and decisions will be made very, very shortly as to whether they need to be evacuated to, I understand, either Warwick or Toowoomba. Additional SCS, QFS, QPS and ADF are ready to go to be, if necessary, heloed out of there, and those, as I said, decisions will be made very, very shortly. I'm extraordinarily comfortable that there is solid planning in place. We have spoken many times to the people on the ground. They are prepared. For the rest of the town, they have been through this before and you've heard this, but there are elevated areas at the showgrounds. But it really is the concern about the vulnerable people, and as you can appreciate, it is very difficult to move some of those people, and great care and planning is taking place for that. But certainly extraordinarily pleased with the planning, well ahead of time. And as has been mentioned, the peak is later this evening into the morning, but certainly some of those key decisions are being made as we speak now. Thank you.
Any questions people are expected to be impacted?
So what we're looking at moving initially, and depending on what happens, is just the vulnerable people. And when I talk about an abundance of caution needs to be applied, it takes a long time to move people from hospitals and aged care. So those decisions are being made, and as I indicated, they're going to Warwick and Toowoomba. But in terms of the rest of the town, there are certainly elevated areas in that town, and the town knows, they're very experienced at this. And I'm quite certain a lot of planning, and I'm comfortable with the planning, has been done in that regard. But particularly of concern is the vulnerable people. Thank you. I'll come back. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Queensland Fire and Emergency Services continues to support the severe flooding operations across southeast Queensland. We have State Emergency Service flood boats pre-positioned across the Darling Downs. We also have Fire and Rescue swift water technicians have been pre-positioned into Goondiwindi, into Warwick, into Dalby, and we also have swift water technicians based in Toowoomba that can be moved via helicopter very quickly into communities as required. As the Premier mentioned, we also assisted with assessment of damaged buildings in Inglewood yesterday, and we also had 10 Rural Fire Service tankers there helping residents with the washing out and cleaning up of their properties. So that clean-up will continue in Inglewood today, and we stand ready to support communities as these floodwaters move progressively through the catchments over the coming days and weeks to prepare for communities as those water levels rise and to perform rescues as required, and we'll support any evacuation operations that may be required in Goondiwindi today. Our message is still very clear though. If there's floodwaters and you're out on the roads, please, if it's flooded, forget it. There's never a safe time to be driving through floodwaters. Please back it up and find another way. Thank you.
Premier, dirt does Alan McSpiron have on the government? What I mean by that, he's a guy that runs an organisation that's just been torn apart by a report. They've questioned his leadership. They've made some pretty strong comments about what's going on. Why is he still in his position, and how come you haven't acted to remove him?
Well, let me say a couple of things about that report. So, first of all, it was a report that was handed down by the bipartisan committee, the PCCC, in the Parliament yesterday. That report is a very serious report, and government needs to give that serious consideration. The report has just been tabled. It's very comprehensive. Government is going to look at that in detail, and then we will formally respond to that report.
Is he a dead man walking?
Look, I am not commenting, and the report found no findings against a particular individual. The findings talked largely about cultural issues, but as I said, they are very serious issues. And let me make it very clear: from what I heard in the Parliament yesterday and the recommendations that I've seen, it is very serious.
Are you still backing him?
I have confidence in having an anti-corruption watchdog in this state. I mean, it's one of the hallmarks that came out of the Fitzgerald inquiry, and it does serve our state very well. But these are serious matters, and I'm not going to comment any further until we have looked in detail at the report.
Well,
It would be.
Premier, you backed him. Are you still backing him?
I'm going to look at the report in detail, and I'm not commenting. I'm not going to make any further comments until I've given that due consideration.
What's untenable for him to stay on?
Sorry?
Isn't it untenable for him to stay on as chair of the CCC afterwards?
I'm going to read the report in detail, and I think Queenslanders would expect me to do that first.
What
Have
do
you
you
read
think
it?
of John Krause's comments yesterday in the House when he said that he was warned of consequences, pushing this inquiry?
These inquiries are very important. It's a bipartisan committee, and that report was tabled yesterday, and that's the functions of the PCCC. The PCCC is like an oversight body of the CCC. So, like I said, it is a very serious report, and government will be taking it seriously. I'm going to read the report in detail, and as I said, now I'm not going to make any further comment.
Premier, as part of if you're going to look into these details, will you look back at 2018 to Minister Hinchliffe and the decisions he made about the Ipswich Council? Because there's been, within that report, it keeps coming back to that. So that must mean that Minister Hinchliffe is a part of, I guess, what you will be looking at.
We will be responding to that report. There are no recommendations there made against any minister in the government.
But they do
Full
go
stop.
back. But they
There are
do
not.
go back to that, and they do talk about.
No, we'll be
2018.
looking at I'm not making any further comments until I read the report. Queenslanders would expect me to do that, and my cabinet will take these issues very seriously.
Who do you see as being responsible for the culture of the CCC?
For the
culture of the CCC, who's responsible for the culture?
well, the committee, the report talks about cultural issues within the CCC. Lydia, I'm going to read the report.
So you haven't read it yet, have you?
There were two major reports that were tabled yesterday. One was 1,000 pages and the other one was about 400 pages. That's a novel in itself, so I will be taking my time and reading it. I'm not a speed reader, okay? So I think Cabinet needs to look at a whole range of issues there. There are a lot of recommendations, and people have started work on that already.
Just on that other report, do you think Margaret McMurdo is woke?
Is
Woke?
Woken out of touch. Ian Lever said she was.
Margaret McMurdo has handed down a report to government. Once again, it is a serious report. Issues in relation to domestic and family violence are very complex. Issues related to coercive control need to be addressed, and our government has made a commitment to address those issues. We will now, again, it's 1,000 pages. They need to be looked at in detail, and I thank the women who have come forward and shared their stories. These are deeply personal stories, and they have taken the time to come forward and convey those stories to Margaret McMurdo. This is one part of another report that she'll be handing down. So once again, 1,000 pages, a lot of recommendations, I think nearly 100 recommendations, and we will be looking very closely at that report as well.
Ms McMurdo recommended a commission of inquiry to examine widespread cultural issues in the police service. The police commissioner yesterday said that wasn't needed. Whose side are you taking on this?
I am once again going to be looking very closely at the report, as all Cabinet Ministers will. Now, we operate as a Cabinet in this state, so all of the Ministers will be looking at that and will be feeding into our decision-making, our collective decision-making when it comes to a response to that report.
Are those social comments acceptable, though, for the police union to say that the one with the murder is out of touch and low? Is that acceptable?
A lot of time and effort went into this report, and a lot of people came forward and spoke about their harrowing stories. And their stories need to be taken into consideration.
Do you think he did that then with those comments?
Well, that's a matter for him. That's a matter for him. I am committed to looking at that report in detail and all of the recommendations that are made there.
So in terms of when we can actually see any change or any implementations out of this report, what are we talking, like years down the track?
I think if you have a look at it, she's actually set out a bit of a timetable in relation to, but some of those things I'm quite sure we can come forward with, especially in relation to coercive control. But let me say this, our government has acted on the prevention of domestic and family violence. All of the 140 recommendations have been implemented from the previous report, and over $600 million has gone into it. Of course, there's always more that can be done. During the pandemic, we know that more people have made calls to the hotline for support. Our government has put in place more shelters. Even today, if you saw Minister Furner and his Director General, they shaved their heads to raise money for a refuge for women, which I just think is fabulous. Over $40,000 was raised. This is a big journey, and we take it very seriously. And, the men and women on the front line also take their job very seriously as well. Yep.
Just yesterday the state government was planning to write to the coroner to reopen the Shindy Blackburn investigation. There's still been calls for a full and separate inquiry into the government-run lab to see if there were any other problems in other cases. Is that something you would consider?
Look, let me just have a look first at the letter that's gone. I know the Health Minister was writing to the Attorney General. Let's get the outcome of that first, and if there's anything further we need to do, we'll closely consider it.
You'll consider a
Yeah,
full and
we'll
separate...
closely consider it. Let's have a look at the first stage. Okay.
You said
Last question.
The PwC report didn't make any findings against any offenders.
I said I'm not making any further comments on that until we have read the report. I was very clear on that.
Were you concerned about John Krause's comments, though, that he made in the House?
In relation to what?
Just the report in general and their findings?
He is entitled to make any comments he wants to the House. He is the chair of that committee.
Is it acceptable, though, that people are warning him to tread carefully as the chair of the committee?
Well, he can take actions, and he can report that if he feels that way. He knows the way that he can move.
Can we ask them to the police commissioner?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Thanks. Commissioner, what did you make of Ian Lever's comments yesterday that Margaret McMurdo was woke and out of touch?
Look, I can't speak on behalf of Ian. And I don't know why he made those comments, but I know Ian Levers normally heavily advocates on behalf of his people who are in the field, predominantly doing an amazing job. Why that was said and how it was said, I cannot comment on that. I think it'd actually be inappropriate for me to comment on, why that was said. But certainly from a union perspective, he advocates for his people and who are, as I say, predominantly doing an amazing job in the field.
Some people have suggested that his comments yesterday highlight a widespread cultural issue in the police force. Which makes sense.
Look, I think that's extraordinarily unfortunate that people are saying that. I want to say something about obviously the review. When you get a report like that, it is absolutely devastating. And my people, who are predominantly amazing people going about keeping their communities safe, will also be devastated. To the victims and those women that came forth with their story, a sincere thank you. I expect the highest standards. The community expects the highest standards. Certainly the victims and their families. And if we haven't met those standards, that's incredibly disappointing and unacceptable. I've looked at some of the recommendations, and 17 apply to police, and of 10 of those, we're already doing those things. They're well into play. In fact, we advocated for many of them. And I'll give you an example of that. Coercive control training has already been packaged and ready to go, and we did that with Ann Rose. The co-responder model is something that we've been doing in a number of places, and it's incredibly effective. This is at the point of crisis where police go with social workers and actually deal with the issues as they're happening. Today, as you stand here, there is 330 domestic violence incidents that my staff are attending to across the state. 121 occurrences just last year and a 20% increase on the previous year.
Do you need more police then, given that so much of your time spent dealing with
It's 40% of our work, and we do have considerable police numbers coming, and they're about to roll out. A considerable number of those police are actually going into key areas that have been recommended by the report. So the more that we can dedicate to it, the better. I want to say a couple of things about also the report, which I was incredibly impressed with. It looks at a system, and that is probably the most powerful part of the report. You cannot look at response in isolation of prevention, in isolation of disrupting what's happened. The most incredibly powerful part of the report, it looks at the entire system. And it is a staged approach. It is education in schools, it's education in community, it's all of us to be a party to what's going on. And there are comments about the Commission of Inquiry. I was actually surprised about that recommendation, because as I said, there are 3 points that I have to make about that. We are already implementing a vast majority of the recommendations. In fact, reform started definitely 18 months ago, ongoing reform. And I think when we continue with those recommendations and over the next couple of years that we will address the concerns of the task force. The other issue is a commission of inquiry not only costs millions, it can cost tens of millions. And my concern is that's an opportunity for other areas to receive that money. Victim support, perpetrator programs, always money required from that. And lastly, and whilst I won't comment on the CCC report, is we've always had an external body that has held us to account. And you've heard from the Premier, it came out of the Fitzgerald inquiry many, many years ago, whether it be the current CCC, the CJC, which I was a part of for 3 years, and the CMC, exceptional independent bodies that hold organisations and have held police to account. Once again, a devastating report. It's unacceptable that we haven't met the expectations on victims. I'm sure with these recommendations and our strategies that reform will go a long way down the track to meet their expectations. And to my people who attend this, and it is the most relentless, the most difficult, the most challenging, and if not the most dangerous environment you can work in, please keep up the good work. Be trauma-informed and victim-centric. That's all I can ask of you.
Why do you think that culture persists if you have done so much work in the past 5 years?
Change takes, when I came in, for 18 months, I've driven a reform, change agenda in this. But even when you look at the reforms suggested by the task force, change can't happen overnight. It's training, it's technology, it's systems, it's processes. It's different systems working together. Police with NGOs, police with courts. So it's understandable to drive change that it can never happen overnight. In fact, if it happens overnight, you've got to be really careful that you implemented it properly. So this is extraordinarily important. A staged approach that we can check in and make sure it's done properly, and then we move on to the next stage. As I said, incredibly important that it was a systems-based approach, and I think that in itself is something that I rarely seen before, and excellent. I agree, totally, and I'm very supportive of reviews. If you've ever worked with me in G20 or even in QFES, I wholeheartedly invite reviews into the organisation. And I expect, we had not ever, some 5-6 years ago, and we've had this review. I welcome another review in 3-4 years' time, because the world is changing. If you look across the world in the coercive control, we weren't having that conversation 5 years ago. We're now having that conversation. We've also learnt across the rest of the world what are some of the best ways to deal with this. So we should always be learning, always be improving, and always be reviewing our practices. That is the only way that we're going to deal with, as I always say, a scourge in our society. Will we have the perfect system? At the end of the day, we're dealing with dysfunction, mental health, drug abuse. We're dealing with people who are, controlling. So I don't know if we're ever going to have the perfect system. But we, all of us, have an extraordinary responsibility to make it as good as we can.
Gotta go. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Just quickly,
Yep.
the domestic violence, a few years ago I saw reported it took 4 hours for
Yeah, it still does.
It's still 4 hours.
It takes 4 to 5 hours.
Yeah.
2 officers.
It just seems like